I think there's a natural human tendency for escapism and that nostalgia for the past or a time that we've never experienced. And I think that maybe we experience that more often now with social media, um, where it's not only longing for a past that you didn't have, but it's longing for other people's lives that you will never have.
All right. Hello, guys. Welcome back to the Evergreen RX podcast. I'm your host, Hayden, licensed mental health therapist, Cancer Moon, and the first to get deep at any party. And I am so thrilled to welcome today's guest to the pod, Miss Margot Lee. Margot is a YouTuber, host of the Working Title podcast, which is a genius name for a podcast, by the way, and also the creator of No Particular Order. It's a brand that centers around connection and self reflection. She lives in New York and makes the most satisfying, like, sit down, pay attention mini documentaries about her life. I know I'm not going to be folding my laundry when I'm watching her videos. And she is the one and only person I thought of when I was coming up with this week's topic. So I'm just so excited she said yes and to have her here.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so honored about your laundry comment because I am someone like when people say that they turn on YouTube and just use it basically as a podcast, that I have never related to that. I feel like when I have a YouTube video on, I am like locked in no matter who the YouTuber is. So I appreciate that.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I think there's like a couple people I watch where I'm like, okay, I know some of their more talky videos I can have on in the background, but yeah, not yours. It's definitely the visuals are important
Thank
as
you.
well. So yeah, today we're going to be talking about anemoia, which is a word to describe a nostalgia for a time or place that one has never known. So, as two self reflective girls and Gen Zers, I think that we've got a lot of thoughts to share about this. And just for anybody that's like really interested in this topic or wants to know where I got my inspiration, there's a really amazing article by Freya India that I will link below. Um, but yeah, so kind of the particular direction I want to go talking about anemoia as it applies to us and people in our generation is really about this longing for time pre phones or pre internet that seems particularly acute for people our age. And off the bat, I'm wondering like why we think that time is so much better. You know, is it this idea that people were actually more present then, or is there something else entirely that we're really yearning for that it seems people used to have?
For me, when I have that longing for a time before technology and iPhones where everything is at the touch of a button, I think it's definitely being present and connecting with the people around us in a more meaningful way. Um, when I Something I'm working on now is trying to be less reliant on my phone.
Mm,
And a rule that I've tried to make for myself, I live in New York, so I'm constantly walking from place to place. That's like my form of transportation. And it's so easy to just scroll on your phone and be doing emails and hopping on a phone call, listening to a podcast when you're getting from point A to point B. And it's really hard to pry yourself away from that. And that's just one example of a time that I think there's an opportunity to be present and look around you and be mindful
mm,
and maybe like meet people, interact with the world around you. And it's so easy not to do that. So I definitely think the most relevant thing for me when I'm thinking about this longing for a time before technology is definitely just being more present. And I think it's also easy to say that, like, oh, you would have better connections before technology and you would
mm,
be able to get deeper with people. But I honestly don't know if that's true because I think about a lot of the people that I have the most meaningful relationships with, and a lot of it is thanks to technology.
mm-hmm.
Not necessarily that we like met on the internet, but a prime example is my boyfriend lives in England and we FaceTime and we use technology as a means to be together and be in a relationship and communicate. And I'm really grateful for that. So I don't want to just write off like meaningful, deep relationships. But I think something that I definitely notice is when I'm having a conversation with somebody and they're on their phone, I'm like, I can't think. I think it's the most disrespectful thing ever. And
Mhm.
I've caught myself doing that. And especially like with people in my family or people that I'm really comfortable with, and I know that like they're not going to stop loving me because I'm on my phone. I've caught myself doing that. So I'm really trying to stop doing that and being aware of when I'm being disrespectful, when I'm not allowing myself to connect with people because of that technology.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I agree with you. I think the presence is a big part of it. It's kind of funny because now, like being present, being mindful, it's like this practice. And like there's people that are passionate about that. And then there's people that don't care as much. And it feels like part of what was kind of the norm pre-internet was just naturally being more present. Like it wasn't so
Mm.
much of the conversation. Obviously there's always meditation, things like that, but just really throughout your day-to-day life being super in the moment, it just was more natural and
It's
expected.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that because being mindful does feel like it's an opt-in culture. Like you have to make the decision that you are going to be present and be mindful, which just seems so backwards. I think you're spot on.
Yeah, like I know one of the things that is linked in the article, and it's something I think that was big on TikTok for a while, is like a video of like kids in this high school in the 90s, and everybody in the background's like they're all talking to each other and interacting. And it's like, well, yeah, because you were at school, so you really had nothing else that you could do. So you're just like with everybody in that experience. But now, yeah, somebody can be FaceTiming someone halfway across the world during lunch, which I agree with you. There's so many wonderful things about that, but it does feel like, in particular, this idea of like kind of being where we are when we're there feels more optional and I think is causing a lot of people pain.
Mm. Yeah, I think the whole like mental health aspect of social media and technology is just like too large to navigate. I think like we all know that mental health has suffered because of technology. But I do love what you were saying about like in the background of the high schools in the 90s of people just chatting and just like standing around. Something I was thinking about recently is like, I don't know the last time that I have been bored, like truly bored to my wits' end, similarly to how I was when I was like 10 years old on a road trip with my family. And I think boredom can definitely, I don't want to like romanticize this thing that's just not enjoyable, but I do think that giving our brains a break and not feeling like it has to be a productive break and like I think a lot of times when I'm being intentional or mindful about being off of my phone and like opting into that sort of mindset, I feel like I have to use that time to come up with new ideas and be
Mhm.
creative and download everything that I was doing online or being out in the world. But I think that's something that we've lost and is probably really beneficial for our mental health is just letting our brains just have like no noise and be bored and just like relax for a minute.
Yeah, it's so interesting because now it is also kind of optional in a way how much we have to contend with these uncomfortable emotions or states. Like boredom is uncomfortable to some degree and like it's not fun. I don't think people back in the day were like loving being bored, but it was an like it was going to happen. You were going to deal with that and just sit through it and move on. And I think that is reflected in a lot of other uncomfortable emotions too. Of like now, if you're really sad or upset, or like I get home from like a long day of work and go immediately to my phone or to these distractions because I can and it's there. And then like it just gets a flood of dopamine and I feel a little bit better. And yeah, like it doesn't always solve, clearly we can see, like it doesn't actually solve anything, but we have a lot more at our fingertips to help us kind of pull out of these uncomfortable emotions and not see them as just kind of a part of like day to day life.
Mm. I read this really amazing newsletter recently, and one of the things that they were writing about was how we really have quick fixes for everything in life right now, and especially for these mental health situations where maybe it's technology where we're just distracting ourselves or we're like self medicating with algorithms and technology and trying to find content that makes us feel better. Outside of that, there's also like so many different medications now. And
Mhm.
again, this is like a whole other rabbit hole, but I think we've gotten so used to having solutions at our fingertips that we lack creativity in figuring out other ways to experience it. And also understanding that like pain and suffering is part of the human experience. And those things can lead to really great moments. And I'm a firm believer that without your lows, you're not going to have your highs. And
Yeah.
something I've been thinking about with my business is I've like really been leaning into being a founder and growing my journaling business and trying to figure out what the next steps with content creation are for myself. So I'm putting myself out there a lot and I'm taking a lot of meetings and I'm pitching myself, and it feels really exciting to have these high highs of like getting in these doors and getting to have these opportunities and conversations. But I'm also experiencing these really low lows because with more like pitches and putting myself out there, I'm also getting more rejections than I've ever
Yeah.
gotten. So it's an interesting, like, I don't feel like I'm taking like the quick path out where I'm just trying to go viral overnight and like get these immediate successes and wins and kind of like look to the rest of the world like I am succeeding and I'm skipping all of these steps of like pain and suffering and misery and trial and error. Um, but it's definitely hard to do, to take that slower route and understand that like we're going to need to experience the lows in order to really like appreciate and see what the highs look like and where we want those highs to take us.
Yeah, and for it to be sustainable because so
Mhm.
much of the kind of quick path, it doesn't seem sustainable or fulfilling in the same way. And so it's like, I think something you're hitting on makes me think about like the idea of delayed gratification too, because that, I mean, what do we delay gratification for ever now? Like,
Mhm.
listening to new music right when it comes out, even when we do have to wait for something, you're at like the doctor's office or whatever. I mean, you've got your phone, like you can do a million things in that time. Like there is no waiting anymore. And I think that goes along with what we're talking about on that delaying gratification, like is kind of uncomfortable or you want it, but there's something that feels special and desirable about that because like now that we don't have it so much.
Mm. I think there's probably like a whole scientific argument also for delaying gratification in terms of our like dopamine levels and how our brain gets used to just like getting quick hits of dopamine and um just kind of like becoming used to that. And I think also when we're thinking back to our like prehistoric ancestors of like they didn't know when they were going to have their next food or kill or meal or sunshine, and they had to get used to like these long periods of just being patient and knowing that like something good will come eventually.
Yeah.
So I do think that like with technology and I mean even something I think about a lot with delaying gratification, and I don't want to speak on this too much because I don't have personal experience with it, but
Mm.
with these weight loss drugs like semaglutide and Ozempic and Wegovy, there's this whole, I mean, it's just taking this delayed gratification situation into like our health and our weight loss and something that I think there's amazing uses for it. Absolutely. I think it can change lives and be an incredible tool that people really need. But I also think like even with, oh my God, with plastic surgery and like
Mhm.
it is unbelievable to me how many creators are getting plastic surgery, Botox, filler, lipo, I mean, it is, like, so crazy, and I think I don't know how I feel about people showing it online. I think it's great to have transparency and be real about like, okay, I'm getting this work done and that's why I look different. I think that's amazing. But I also think that like constantly showing your audience that you're getting work done and you're changing yourself and you're doing all these things that are like quick fixes in order to look like a filter can
Yeah.
also be so damaging. And like I have friends, I mean, it's just like girlhood now is talking about like, when do I start getting Botox? And like, should I get this treatment because it's going to be like a quick result? Like, the scale of this is so terrifying. And yeah.
Yeah, that's so fascinating, like, bringing that perspective into even with our health, like, the idea that that can be kinda expedited or some steps can be skipped over and we can buy our way into certain things too, like, that's a whole other part of this conversation is, like, so much is wrapped up in, like, what you have access to, what you have the financial means for, and basically, like, what level can we just, like, dull life down to the most neutral, you never have to struggle, everything is handled for you in the quickest, most efficient manner if you have, the status and the means to get there. And I feel like so much is getting lost in that process. And there is this level of like chronic dissatisfaction that everyone is feeling. But if you looked like probably if you told somebody from like the 1900s, 1800s, any time before now, like what our life looks like today, they'd be like, wow, that is nice. Like you have a toilet that flushes, you've got, all of these things that we have. You don't even have to go get your food, but something about actually experiencing it isn't so great all of the time. And it does feel like something about like the human experience almost is getting watered down through
Mhm.
this, through just like having to age as we age or be bored or whatever, all of these things that we're talking about.
I think there's a natural human tendency for escapism and that nostalgia for the past or a time that we've never experienced. And I think that maybe we experience that more often now with social media, um, where it's not only longing for a past that you didn't have, but it's longing for other people's lives that you will never have. And when I was reading the questions that you sent over, something I was thinking about is even in my content, it's my life. And, I'm not like going out and filming a vlog of like a fake life that I live. All of my content very much reflects like my day to day and how I'm experiencing life. And I'm sharing that with my audience. But that being said, like that's still produced and it's still edited and it's romanticized through beautiful
Mm,
music and interesting text and I give myself like a couple weeks until I look back at the content and reformat it and create these like videos. So even my life that I'm recording and it's not super filtered and it's not super produced when I'm shooting it, but like in post production, I have the ability to make my own life something I can have nostalgia for a life that I've never lived.
yeah.
And that's like what social media is. And of course, we hear all the time like, oh, Instagram is a highlight reel and like social media is a highlight reel. And we know that. And we know that when I'm looking at somebody, a beautiful Instagram, that that's not what their everyday looks like. Like they go to the same grocery stores as me and they have to fill up their gas. And, they're also going to doctor's offices and like anesthetic places.
Hmm.
But we have this tendency for this like escapism and this need for a life that's not our own that we will fill in the gaps to create something and tell ourselves that like what we have is not enough.
Oh my, yeah, I love everything that you're saying because it's so funny to like acknowledge that in a situation like this too, where, you know, I have watched your content for a long time and have been a fan of you and I guess ostensibly of your life because that's what your content is about. And that feeling of like, when I was younger being like, do I need to move to New York? This looks pretty awesome. Or like now kind of talking to you, like as soon as we logged on and like even preparing for this, it's like, oh yeah, you're another person and we're having a conversation, and like there's so much in between
Mm,
what all ends up in videos or that gets posted online. And that's true for everybody. I mean, me making a podcast, like that is more of a structured sit down, I'm not showing my life, but there's still this idea that you form this version of me or whatever I'm doing in your head. And there's so much more to it. And I don't know, like, it's so hard because we both know exactly this feeling we're talking about, and I'm sure everybody listening understands this, but it's hard to pinpoint like why. If we're just being completely conditioned and this is like almost just involuntary, which a part of it is that, and then also if there's something else about this escapism tendency that has gotten so cultivated and like nurtured in our society that it's developed to this level where we can be cognizant of it and still be playing into it
mm.
and still want to believe kind of the lie.
I I think it's good to be aware of it, and I think I've become better at being aware of when I'm what I've been trying to do actually with this like escapism and jealousy and envy that we all get when we're looking on people's things on social media is something I think we all struggle with, and especially at this age, is what do I want to do in life? And that can be a big, like as big of a question as like, what do I want my career to look like? Or do I want to be a mother? Or what country do I want to live in is something that I'm trying to figure out for my
Yeah.
next year. Or it can be as small as like, I wish I ate better today, or I really like that outfit. And all of these lives are like, I've seen all of these things online. I've seen mothers, I've seen people who live in England, I've seen people who are in their 60s and live in a gorgeous penthouse in New York. I've seen amazing outfits online. Like everything is at my fingertips. And what I'm trying to do is train myself to, instead of feel this like pang of envy and lack when I see these things, I'm trying to use those feelings as indicators of like, oh, that's something that you want in your life. Like
Yeah.
if you're looking at this and you're like so like seething with envy that this person is traveling and like gets to do all of these incredible opportunities, that should be an opportunity for you to look inwards and say like, okay, maybe it's not realistic that I'm going to have that this year or in the next 5 years, but let me like write this into my story. And this is one of the reasons why I love journaling is it helps me keep track of all of these ambitions and goals because I think every day we're seeing things that we would ideally love to have in our life, but being able to actually like keep track of that, use it as a bucket list to like check things off as we get there.
Mhm.
I think that's a healthier way to to look at these kind of like quick fixes or like quick jealous moments on social
Yeah.
media.
I mean, genius way to look at envy. I love the way you describe that on like what, always turning it back to you and that self-reflection piece of like, okay, what is it here that's like really activating?
Mhm,
Because we see a lot of things. I mean, you scroll on Pinterest, you see a lot of beautiful things. I might pin a lot of things, but not all of them impact me the same way. I'm like, "This is beautiful," but like, it's okay. Like, I don't need that. But then there's certain, things that you see where you're just like, "Oh my gosh," like, especially when it's these online personas where you really follow and you feel like, "Oh, this is someone's life," and like, "Why is this
mhm,
not my life?" And I think distilling down to like, "Okay, what is it that I am coveting so much? And then how can I prioritize that?" Because so much of just living a life and trying to create one that is fulfilling for you is about prioritizing and figuring out that we can't live 8 million lives. We only have ours. And what is it that really matters most? And I'm super interested to hear from you because of your emphasis on connection and, you know, creating this life that really does resonate for you. What is the struggle when sometimes we find ourselves in moments doing the thing that we wanted? Maybe we're on the trip or we're at dinner with this amazing partner that's come into our life, and we still can feel some of this dissatisfaction or some dis-ease when we're in that moment, when it's what we want is right in front of us.
Mm. I think this question makes me think of dating apps, and this is a conversation that I've had with my boyfriend, not about our relationship, but we find this whole situation interesting. How dating apps have made it so that you can have like your dream person sitting across from you at the table, and you know that there's an infinite amount of other options at your fingertips. So you're constantly going to be thinking, what else is out there? And I think Santori, my boyfriend and I got lucky because we got together during the pandemic, and like that wasn't really a time of like meeting a lot of people or putting yourself out there. So in our kind of like getting to know you stages as a couple, we were pretty singularly focused on each other. And I think once you
Yeah.
reach a certain point in a relationship, hopefully you're not really focused on what else is out there. And the same
Mhm.
goes for like career and um you know where you're living or whatever, however you define success. Like, of course, you're always cognizant that there's other options, but hopefully at a certain point and a certain stage, you can start to feel more comfortable with your decision where you just kind of like lock everything out and okay, for my relationship, like I know who I want to be with, but like maybe we have certain goals of like how we want to like be in this relationship or my career. I know generally what path I'm heading down, and I know that there's a ton of options for me. But right now, I'm not looking at like, oh, what if I decided to do like architecture or, nursing and if I was, then that would be like a great opportunity to explore those different options and to pay attention to that. Um, but I think it's really hard to do, and I think, like, in
Mhm.
early stages, and I think that's why I really struggled the first year post-grad, and I think a lot of people find that you're really difficult, is you feel like you're just thrusted into this world of, like, you can do anything, but you can do anything, so make sure you pick the right thing,
Yeah.
and it's it's really hard to just trust yourself. I think the best thing that you can do is take it's one foot after the other. Just take baby steps and take it day by day. And if things don't feel right, then like discard that and replace it with something else that you can test out. Another reason why I love journaling is because like I love this idea that the most important relationship we're ever going to have in this lifetime and the longest relationship we're ever going to have is the relationship that we have with ourselves. And it's important that we communicate with ourselves and we check in with
Mm,
ourselves.
mm.
And for me, I'm a very visual person, which I think is part of why I rely on journaling so much. But my way that I communicate with myself and I have conversations and check in with myself is by writing things down. And that's how I can create a conversation that's ongoing and look back at what I was thinking about and edit and change things and not be too precious and feel like everything is stuck inside because then it gets very like insular. But
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, it's almost this way of like nowadays because we have access to so much, we can see, beforehand when you live in a small town or literally any size town, all you're really experiences is the lives of the people that are also in your town. And
Mhm.
now we can see anybody anywhere in the world, in rapid succession, just one after another, all these different lifestyles. So it's like having to create our own type of like horse blinders on things and be like, okay, if I really focus in, and I like what you're saying a lot with the journaling piece on like, if you're really struggling with figuring out what actually matters to you, starting to journal or write things down and really record them, take them out of your head, you might be able to like start to see through lines. Like,
Mm,
okay, I've been talking about the same thing for the past 6 months, or I look back and I actually talked about wanting to do this a year ago. So maybe there's really something there because I think so much of what can happen now is we have a lot of noise that drowns out that connection we have to our own like internal guidance system and our own intuition. So if that is something that you're really struggling with, then having kind of an external source almost to keep track for you and to be able to reflect back so that it can clear away some of the other input.
I also I like what you were saying about like having all of these different options and interests, and I think that's truly what makes a person interesting is having range and having experiences in a lot of different fields. Like the last person I want to sit next to at a work dinner or a networking event or at a dinner party is somebody who's been doing the exact same thing for their entire life and they don't have any other like cultural touch points or interests or hobbies because okay, I can talk to you about your career for 5 minutes, but I want to like know who you are as a person and what you care about. And I always say like hobbies are what makes a person interesting. And I think
Mm,
even looking back at our hobbies from childhood, like I like dancing. I just started getting into dancing again because it was something that I loved doing. It was like my sport when I was a kid and getting back into that. And I've met such interesting people, and that's potentially where career paths come from. Like my career path as a content creator stemmed from my hobby as a kid of like making these weird videos and putting them on YouTube. So
mhm,
like also following those paths and being okay with just letting things be a hobby. Like I'm seeing all these TikToks about the fig tree. I think there's a poem about the fig tree, which is like every branch has like a different life that you could have lived. Also,
mhm,
same idea as the Midnight Library, how you have like all these, which is a book, um, alternate universes of like lives that you could have pursued. I think the solve to that potentially is like allowing yourself to have those hobbies and those experiences. And it doesn't have to be the most important thing in your life, but just because like you could have been a ceramicist or you could have been a surfer or a content creator or a caregiver, like it doesn't mean that you have to do it full time in order for that to still be a part of your
a
life.
part
And
of
I'm like
you.
constantly trying to remind myself of that.
Yeah. I think people like I agree with you. People are so multifaceted and passionate about so many things, and that's a wonderful thing. That's why luckily one of the good things about the time that we're living in is people now have a lot more ability to create crazy new paths and
Mhm.
careers and amalgamations of things, and it's really cool. Um And I also know, especially like around our age and post grad and things like that, that it can be really difficult or painful in some ways because we can feel so lost and confused. And I think when we touch back on the idea of anemoia, it's like feeling lost probably prior to the internet. There at least wasn't a lot of input saying everything else that you should or could be doing.
Mhm, totally.
So what it seems like people did back then is just kind of explore because I don't know, what are you going to do? So you got to go out and experience things to figure it out and check in with yourself. Okay, how did that make me feel when I experienced that? And that's what I mean too when that connection is lost of like doing something, asking yourself how you feel and then making your next move based off of that.
I think what you were saying about having almost this like paralysis of choice is so spot on. And that is part of the nostalgia for a time before technology. And like, especially in our like early to mid 20s and like early careers, is when my mom was working in New York, of course, like she would meet people and hear about their stories and hear about friends of friends and like read the newspaper and see what was out there. But you're not constantly having these insights into like the best parts of people's lives and careers every single day and like hours for every single day. You're not focused on what other people are doing. So it's almost this like this longing for just like shutting everyone else out
Mhm.
and just being able to focus on yourself and not feeling like there's like it's this FOMO for this life that you never actually even wanted, but it's just like there and you have to pay attention to it.
Yeah, I think something that comes along with that is we have such intense like self scrutiny because of, how does my life measure up to this person's life and am I making the right choices? Things that every 20, 30-year-old people experience this at all different points of their life, but things that in every generation people have asked themselves these questions. But now there's this level of um, comparison that is so high. There's so much access to compare. And it's just interesting to me how, like, the idea of, like, private enjoyment of things, just, like,
Mhm.
personal enjoyment, idea of having a hobby, and it doesn't have to be everything, and maybe you do the hobby for a little bit, and then you don't do it for years, and you come back to it and whatever, and it's just part of the story and what makes up your life. Now it feels like that's not so much of an option. It's like, if something isn't documented, if something isn't, shared, that it isn't as, like, real or tangible,
Mhm.
it doesn't mean as much, I don't know, and so that's something I wonder on, like, how do we kind of recenter on our own experience? And we've already been touching on this, but like anything else of kind of recentering on why we're doing things, who we're doing them for, and you know, if that's even the goal or the point anymore, if we just have to update to some new expectation.
Mm. I definitely struggle with that. I think especially with social media, I'm aware that like the more multifaceted that I appear on social media, the more enjoyable my content will be to consume.
Mm,
I'm not somebody who loves following somebody who's just like in a specific niche. I like seeing people who are multifaceted and interesting and share a lot of different parts of their lives, which can manifest in me doing something because it's a hobby and I want it to be a part of my life that's offline, but then it makes me feel more interesting if I talk about it online. So, for example, dance. Like, in fact, one of the reasons that I haven't danced in so long is because I want to keep it far from social media. Like, my biggest fear is taking a dance class and sucking at it because I haven't taken ballet or whatever in so long, and somebody coming up to me and saying like, "I watch your videos," or "I know who you are." Like,
mm,
I want that to be like a sacred, safe part of my life, and I know that once I start talking about it and start saying like, "Oh, I take classes here," and it's not even about like being seen, but it's about me like being able to try something and fail and just having it be like a sacred thing just for me. So I think that's like, and I don't know what the solution to that is. And
yeah.
I think it's a very valid point that you bring up.
Going There was something that you said a while back that I really wanted to touch on, which is, you know, you were talking about dating and how when you start getting to know someone, you like really want to focus in on that person and not think about all your other options. And that goes for hobbies, for passions, for new pursuits. It's very vulnerable, it's very scary. We can fail, we mess up. Being a beginner at something is super uncomfortable. And so it is a challenge. It's always been a challenge to stick with something even when it's new and it's uncomfortable and you think of all the other options or things you could be doing with your time, but it's especially more of a challenge when we're always being shown the other options.
Mm.
And to the very beginning, we don't have to feel so uncomfortable if we don't want to now. You know, that's
Mm.
not as much of an expectation these days.
Mm. Yeah, I think something I've been doing recently is I always found workout classes really intimidating. It always
Mhm.
felt like a space that like everyone knew exactly what they were doing, and I walked in and I was like the loser who didn't know how the class ran. I didn't know what equipment to get, and I wasn't friends with the workout instructor. And I joined a gym that has basically the only thing I do now are workout classes, and I think even just that of, like, every week, I would put myself in a situation that felt uncomfortable and, you know, I could have easily, like, just gone with friends or texted people or, like, I think they even have, like, an app where you can see, like, the types of people that are at the gym or whatever, but starting to just flex those muscles of, like, no pun intended, of being in spaces that feel uncomfortable is
Mm.
really hard, but I feel like growth from those types of experiences, which is really nice.
Yeah, that's so awesome. I think it's, one of the last things that I had thought to touch on is like the idea of growing up clumsily. And I think we can expand that to growing up at whatever age, like we're always growing. And it's almost like what you were doing with going to these workout classes and trying something new and pushing yourself, it's like kind of reclaiming and like really intentionally creating that space for yourself to like make mistakes or to look silly or to, feel really awkward. Um, and do it despite the fact that you might not be the only one that witnesses it. It could go down forever, like even just with friends. It can be recorded and then always referenced and pulled back
Mm.
up. And, you know, that is difficult. And I don't think we have as much of a privilege of being able to just freely explore, but it still is possible to create that space for yourself and the resiliency to deal with, whatever the impact is. I think especially for you being someone online, like just the resiliency of, yeah, something could be posted online and maybe it's embarrassing or somebody knows me and they see me and,
Mm.
um, at the end of the day, like it'll be okay. And I think kind of consciously making those choices for ourselves and like bringing that energy to our groups and to the people that we talk to and have conversations with about things, hopefully will let us like reclaim some of the things I think we're missing.
One of the things that I don't have it in the journal. So my company, no particular order, we produce prompted journals, and our kind of flagship product is Volume One. And we don't have this in the journal, but every time I do workshops and talk to people about like my journal practice and how I would recommend people use the product, one of the things I always say is it's okay to like rip pages out and cross things out and misspell words, and you can release this idea of like perfectionism and preciousness with your journal. And I think hopefully that helps you, like the more you do it and the more you're okay with not taking yourself too seriously, the more
Yeah.
you can bring that into your real life. And another lesson that I try to share is there's always going to be another page, which like you can
Mm,
take that as literally or metaphorically as you want. Even with volume one, you can fill up your journal and use every prompt in the book, and you can get another one. Like they're always going to be available. And I think with life, like there's always going to be a new chapter, there's always going to be a fresh start and a blank page and an opportunity to retell your story and start new. And as long as we remember that like something that we do isn't going to be the last thing we are remembered by and what's going to define us, that can like release our own expectations from ourselves and
mm.
allow ourselves into those spaces of like not taking ourselves so seriously.
I love that. What a wonderful kind of message to walk away from this conversation with. And to anybody listening, what I always want to do with this podcast is encourage people to engage, to join the conversation, to like be a part of the community that we're creating. And so I want to hear y'all's thoughts too. There's a lot that we covered and probably so much more to say about it. But I appreciate you being on so much, Margot. What anything you want people to know listening, I'm gonna have you all like linked in the show notes and everything. But
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for having me. This was a really thoughtful conversation, and I appreciate you taking the time to prepare for this conversation and ask really great questions. But yes, I do have something to share. No particular order. Probably by the time this is out, just launched a new journal.
woo,
The journal is a travel journal. So it's a 64-page prompted journal that's designed to be used over one trip. It's absolutely gorgeous and it's pocket sized, and so much thought and time has gone into this. And is also great for conversation starters on trips or little, girls' experiences, bachelorette trips, whatever. So it's been really fun to be working on that and now have it out in the world. But you can find me on basically every social media platform under Margot Lee, and no particular order.
awesome. Yeah, I'm so excited about that journal. I love to travel and I like journaling. That sounds right up my alley too. So I'm excited to get one of those. And yeah, I just am so happy that I got to have you. You're welcome back anytime. And I hope you guys like listening. Join in next week for more conversations about all things living intentional, mental health related, and
And
yeah,
guess where I'm going right now in 10 minutes?
where?
A dance class.
Hey, yes. That's awesome. All
Thank
right. Well,
you so
thank
much
you
for
so
having me.
much. Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.